Good, Tim. What's going on, bud?
Hey, how we doing, guys?
TV, what's up?
Not too much, not too much. How we feeling?
Uh, I feel pretty good. I think, I don't know, it just seems like a team that's had a really good week of preparation, and they seem pretty dialed, right?
Yeah,
I, their focus seems to be at a pretty high level.
yeah. I've liked kind of where the just kind of taking a temperature of where the moment doesn't seem too big. They seem ready for the moment. And on top of that, I think um there's a composure there, and I think this there's a talk of like, hey, let's not you know get way up for one game and come out flat for another. I think that consistent approach is like um it's what am I trying to say? Permeating through the roster. Like it's not just the coaching staff that's saying it at this point. I think the roster truly believes that. So, yeah, I'm expecting at least early on, a dialed, calculated Nebraska, and we'll see how they hold up, in a tense game. But at least to start, I'm expecting this team to be dialed and focused.
Tim, do you think I know people always poo poo kind of the Akron and Houston Christian parts of the schedule, right? But do you think part of the benefit of playing teams like that is learning how to get yourself self motivated when the opponent or the brand isn't necessarily as sexy as a Michigan or a Colorado or whatever?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, you play those two games, and it's not about the Michigan type games. It's about down the line. It's 2 weeks from now. Can you get back up for Michigan State? Can you get up for Northwestern? Can you get up, down the schedule? UCLA is going to be that's going to be you're going to have to bring your own juice the way like early on. We're 2 months out from that game, and maybe they turn things around and have some momentum around that time, but more likely than not, Nebraska's going to have to bring their own juice for that game. So it's not about necessarily these type of games, but it's just about learning how to win, learning how to approach each opponent. Like they talk about nameless, faceless opponent. It's learning how to do those kind of things, and then it's the reward. It's the hey, at the end of the game, it's like look how much we were able to clear the bench. If you guys keep doing this, we can do this against Northwestern. We can do this against UCLA, and so I think it's more of that.
When you're talking about, so we went into this deal in the first segment about like referendums versus not referendums and kind of where this game ranks in the pecking order. And my stance is that it's another data point for Nebraska to decide how close they are to their own barometer, their own benchmark. Can you have that conversation, in your opinion, from our vantage point and not inside the walls differently without factoring in the results of Michigan tomorrow, win or lose?
Um, Honestly, no. I mean, I don't know. Like, I do think you need that game. I think you need this test. I think you need, I mean, I like to, like, I was thinking this week, I was like, oh, is it worth reflecting on what we've learned through 3 weeks? I don't think so. I think we need to get these four games under us, and then we'll have a better idea of what this team is. This Michigan team challenged Nebraska in different ways than Cincinnati did, and in the same way, I think the lesson that there are lessons to be learned from Akron and Houston Christian, but you take everything from those games with a grain of salt, considering, the just the talent imbalance.
Mm. Tim, when you're kind of looking at what this Michigan team is and some of the challenges they bring to the table, like you said there, I think some people do look at them, myself included, to a certain degree, as having some similarities as Cincinnati. Where do you think they differ in the places they challenge Nebraska?
Yeah, I think defensively is where I'm interested in, just because it's not that Cincinnati's defense like played Nebraska a specific way where, they were able to drop potentially three safeties into coverage, and they were dropping multiple bodies, into coverage. And, they were kind of trying to keep everything underneath. I do expect something similar from Michigan's defenses in the sense that I do think they're going to want to keep everything underneath. But I do think they're going to trust their DBs more on islands. I think there's going to be more opportunities for Dylan and the offense to kind of open it up a little bit at times when it makes sense. But I think it's going to take efficiency from Dylan. I think it's going to take being smart with the football. I think while Cincinnati maybe challenged Nebraska in the type of defense they played, Michigan's defense is going to challenge Nebraska and the different looks it's going to give Dylan in the the way they're going to disguise coverages and disguise pressure. And I think defensively is where I look at the biggest differences. Offensively, I mean the game plan. I mean, or defensively for Nebraska specifically, I think is where the game plan is. Like I think Nebraska attacks this game similar to how they attacked Cincinnati, where hey, like by the second half, ideally you want to be more bottled up against the QB run, but if you're able to kind of shut down the offense to the point where the only thing really going for them is the QB run game, you feel pretty good about where you're at come the second half.
So if we're kind of talking about this the matchup on paper, how much of this do you think is more about that 6-inch space between the earlobes than it is the actual physical matchups on the field? And if you do feel like it's more about the mental approach than the actual matchups, where's the advantage, do you think, for Nebraska?
I think it is going to be mental just because I think I think it comes down to both quarterbacks. How much is Bryce grown from that Oklahoma game? Is he, where is he at in terms of playing in some of these crazy road environments? I would argue Nebraska has a chance to be up there even crazier than, Oklahoma, the environment he faced in Oklahoma. On the other side, I think with Dylan, it's I wrote it yesterday, but I think it's like, these are the type of games he came to Nebraska for. Nebraska needs him to be efficient and dialed to win this game. I think he's the guy that, you look from I think if you look at the pure depth and talent standpoint, you can make the argument Michigan has a better team, but it's the talents like Dylan Raiola and those kind of guys on the roster that are supposed to elevate Nebraska in these type of matchups. He needs to do that. And where is he at come from last year? Is he more composed? Is he going to get rattled? I think we're going to get a really good idea of where Dylan's at probably early enough in the game of like a big third down, a big critical situation. Where is he at mentally? Can he, if he makes a mistake, can he stay composed, or is he going to get rattled? Is it going to, kind of come apart when, he throws an interception or a drive falters and they fall behind the sticks? Like, I just want to see where he's at mentally. And then defensively, I think for them, just because of the style of defense they play this year, it's so much matchup oriented and it's so much snap to snap of like, you have to win your gap this snap. You have to win there just has to be a resiliency there because, and I wrote this again yesterday, Justice Haynes at some point is going to break an explosive play. Nebraska hasn't allowed one yet this year, but just like even against Oklahoma, he had a 75-yard rush. At some point, that's going to happen. What can happen is the rushing success rate that Cincinnati had against Nebraska, where it's every single, okay, they're gaining chunk yardage time. It's like, okay, you can let up an explosive play here or there. You have to be mentally resilient enough. You have to be mentally tough enough to bounce back the next drive, bounce back the next play, and keep kind of playing your gap, keep playing assignment sound football, and understand that this is going to be a battle of, 60 minutes of playing assignment sound football more likely than not.
Mm. Tim, you talk about the explosive plays. As I've watched Michigan, it seems like their offense relies a lot on that and has sometimes a little bit of trouble sustaining drives in a way that we saw Nebraska do against Cincinnati, where they had to sort of more methodically get down the field. How much do you think that will have a factor in the game tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see how much Nebraska can hold on to the football offensively. Like how much, we talk a lot about how much this is the breakout opportunity for Dylan. I think this is kind of a breakout opportunity for Emmett to kind of show, hey, I'm one of the best backs in the country. Like everyone's watching Justice Haynes and statistically he's playing as one of the best in the country. But I think Emmett has an opportunity just because this is a tough front. He is the bell cow back, and if he's able to gain positive yards consistently and give Nebraska something on the ground, that's a huge help in keeping and allowing Nebraska to move the ball. And that's where Nebraska kind of has that opportunity to own time of possession. I've seen discussions elsewhere that Michigan has more ways to win this game. I don't think that's true, just based on what we've seen from Nebraska's offense and Michigan's offense so far this year. I think Nebraska has more weapons in space. I think Nebraska is more of a balanced offense, and I think Nebraska has shown through 3 games they can, even against worse opponents. They haven't played in Oklahoma, but they've shown they can move the ball, consistently. And that's a Dana Holgerson thing. And so I think, in Nebraska, that's an opportunity to not necessarily steal possessions, but win time of possession and potentially, create some space between you and the opponent is, you know, when Michigan falls flat, you play sustained drives, you play sustained offensive football, and allow them to make mistakes offensively. Where okay, maybe they're not consistent offensively. You stay consistent offensively, give yourself a chance, maybe steal a possession or two. I think that should be the goal for Nebraska because, yeah, like you mentioned, it's a lot of boom or bust offensively. I personally trust Nebraska's DBs in coverage against these receivers. Marlon Klein's the guy that I think this staff and me myself are like stressed about the most in terms of a weapon in space. But besides that, yeah, you got to bottle up the run game. You got to play assignment sound football, and you hope offensively you're able to own time of possessions. And I think the goal overall for Nebraska this game should be to win games the way Michigan used to win games under Jim Harbaugh.
It's interesting. Because the juxtapose, like the counterpoint to that is, I think Nebraska has got to understand the difference between kind of rhythm and pace, right? They want to be in a good offensive rhythm. But one of the things I think is important is we talk about time of possession. I go back and forth on that. How important is or isn't? I think the real key for Nebraska is when are they snapping the ball on the play clock? Not from a time of possession standpoint, but because if they can play with a little bit of pace, it negates what defensive coordinators typically like to do from pressure packages because you feel like you're on your heels. If Nebraska's not playing with some sort of tempo, then you allow them to settle in with how they want to call defenses. And so there's some give and take there. The faster Nebraska's snapping the ball, the less apt Michigan is for pre-snap movements and to be exotic with some of their packages, if that makes sense. But yeah, Dylan also has those check with me's where he's going to be able to pick and choose how he wants to operate. That, in my opinion, is the real key. It's not necessarily TOP because I don't think Michigan can outscore Nebraska anyway. I think it's the efficiency in which the offense is operating to neutralize the complexity of what Michigan wants to do, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Would you expect some of the game like we saw from Dylan last year where it's like, okay, drive to drive, it's like, okay, the snap is yeah, there's snaps where it's with tempo, but there's others where it's just inconsistent, where he's trying to draw defenses off guard. Like I would expect some of that personally, but is that kind of what you're expecting as well?
Yeah, I like to some degree because I just know if we're signaling in defenses and we want to, we need time, a little bit of time where we feel like we're doing the dictating for pressure packages. Maybe Wink is a little different, but I played for Dom Cape. Like I just think guys that like pressure like to be in control of the flow of the game. So I'll be paying close attention to how Nebraska's manipulating their tempo. Because if Nebraska seems to be in control and Michigan's on their heels, I think you'll catch Michigan a lot more flat foot. If Nebraska's playing slower, which would lend itself to more time of possession, this is taking first downs out of it, right? Because clearly you have to get first downs I'm just talking about on the surface. Then I think it allows Michigan to do what they do. It's a weird kind of back and forth of what we do to neutralize Michigan versus what we want to do to tell ourselves we're giving ourselves the best chance to win games. Will it be the same thing? I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think that factors into I think this game, again, part of what I wrote yesterday about Dylan specifically, part of this game isn't just what he's going to be able to do statistically through the air. It's his mental ownership of the game. What he's seeing at the line of scrimmage. Is he going to be able to check Nebraska into right looks? Like you mentioned, can he use tempo to his advantage and catch his team off guard where, okay, he does something, it's a dummy snap. and he points out where the pressure looks to be coming from, adjust the line or adjust the play, calls a different play. Like, can he do that? You know what I mean? Against a Wink Martindale defense. Like, there's been a lot of praise this offseason about his mental understanding and his ownership of the offense. Can he show that in a big game situation against a veteran defense where you have smart, instinctual players across the unit, from Ernest to Zeke Berry to TJ Metcalf to Jair Hill, and even up front? Like, they're smart, instinctive players on that defense, that are playing the mental game as much as Dylan is. Can he win that matchup?
Tim, how much do you think Nebraska is going to go out of their way to put linebackers from Michigan into coverage positions where they've struggled so far this year? So you're talking about your linebackers, some of your backs out of the backfield, maybe Mosey lining up different places. Like, how much do you think they're going to, I don't know if change their game plan is right, but put an emphasis on trying to get those guys versus linebackers, where that's probably the place Michigan's been the worst defensively this year, is
Yeah,
line.
I thought it was interesting that, like, Rule noted, he sees Emmett Johnson as a guy that can be a number one option in the receiving game, and how much they've used him as a weapon kind of in these empty sets, and how they've motioned him out and used Mosey as well. I'm expecting a ton of that. I'm expecting, like, yeah, not maybe not a ton, but I think Nebraska's going to play more empty than people expect, and it's going to be with Emmett in there or Mosey in there, maybe both, and it's just going to be a lot of moving around. I think Nebraska has some of these individual matchups they believe they can win against linebackers, whether that's Emmett, whether that's Heinrich or Carter, whether that's Luke Lindenmeyer. Like, it's going to be all these different guys they could throw out there that they believe they can win. I mean, those two back sets, like, I'm expecting,
Yeah.
stuff off of that. I thought there was a lot they showed last week where, there was a couple of plays off those two back sets where I turned to Steve and I said, okay, they're going to do something off of that. Maybe next week, maybe down the line the season, but there was I believe there was like a counter RPO, not a counter RPO, but there was an RPO look where they swing someone out. Like, they're going to just do a lot off of those two back looks. Where I'm excited to see how they build that up, and I'm excited to see how they get Emmett into space and just the playmakers into space. Because I think where, like you said, where Michigan has struggled is those linebackers tackle, but I think it is just in general getting playmakers down in space. I think Oklahoma showed you don't need to overcomplicate it. You throw to the open receiver, and Nebraska has weapons. So trust those weapons to make plays in space, because they've shown, at least against Oklahoma, at least Oklahoma showed you can do that against this defense.
Yeah, early on this week, I was walking through some, and it's probably terrible podcasting unless you're watching on video, but just some things I think Nebraska can do out of those two back looks if you don't want to run the quarterback, to give you some viable options with RPOs. And a lot of it is whether it's orbit motion or jet motion or front side fakes and then getting to RPOs on the backside. There's lots of work that I think is well within Coach Holgerson's repertoire that he could show Michigan. If we're just going to stay offense versus offense here for a second before I flip over to defense, I think the whole key, outside of running the football, the whole key in the passing game is going to be the intermediate passing game. It's who controls that 5 to 15-yard hash to hash from a manipulation standpoint the best. Michigan has two outstanding tight ends. It has become Bryce's safety blanket off that boot game and kind of what he wants to do with those concepts. And in Nebraska, I mean, Holgerson is like the king of those mesh concepts and those over routes. And this is a intermediate passing game kind of game for me, because anything outside the numbers is truly, in my opinion, going to be 50-50. It's going to be mano-a-mano out there, and it's going to be about ball placement. Inside the intermediate passing game, I think, is going to be strategy and scheme, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the way they get to that, I mean, like, for Nebraska, it's a lot of not static, but it is a lot of just out of shotgun and out of, it's not a lot of rollouts. But for Michigan, they get to that intermediate game off play action, off, bootlegs and things like that. And so, can you stay sound when, the defense is trying to move you laterally while trying to attack you from an intermediate? Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely where it's something I'm going to be watching too. How comfortable Bryce is throwing across the middle of the field against this defense.
He's gonna have to play catch there at some point tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
and like, I mean, that's where, like, I mean, you look at the strengths of both of these defenses; they're very similar, but they're different. Like, Michigan is versatile in the back seven, but they're normal sized, you know? Nebraska is versatile in the back end, but they've got Deshaun back there, they've got Javen back there, you've got bigger DBs back there. Like you just have size where, that's just a lot of space. Like it's tough to fit a tight window throw in the middle of the field when Javen is there, and then atop of him it's Deshaun. Like it's tough to do that because they cover so much ground as just large human beings.
Mm. Tim, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball a little bit more here as you talk about Bryce Underwood and kind of what they're trying to do with him in the passing game. I'm curious. I keep going back and forth between, hey, Nebraska's pass defense has been really good. You want to make Bryce Underwood beat you through the air versus what does that look like in terms of loading up against the run? How do you think Nebraska is going to start out in terms of what they're emphasizing and what they want to try and take away from Michigan first?
I think they're going to want to take away the run. I think, again, I just think they trust these DBs. I think they trust their guys to win individual matchups. And then up front, it's going to be creative ways of stacking the box, whether that's creeping Deshaun down, whether that's getting into situations where, or packages where it's Rex out there with Deshaun because he's one of the better sound tacklers on the roster. Like I think it's going to be a lot of just like finding ways to win the numbers battle, get guys in the box, keep justice contained, and then at the third level, I think. I just kind of believe through practice this week, there's been an emphasis on tackling in space. It's not about, like I said, it's not about containing Justice Haynes and Bryce Underwood completely. You're not going to do that. No one's been able to do that this year. What you have to do is limit the explosive plays, limit the amount of times they run for over 15 yards, tackle them in open space and prevent them from picking up those first downs, moving the chains, doing those kind of things. That comes down to the second and third level. I need, I've seen more disciplined football from Vincent Shavers and Javen Wright and the linebacker crew in general, Marquise Watson, Trent. I need to see that continue. I need to see Williams and Renari stay a little more disciplined in contain and stay a little more, disciplined in his rush lane. Same goes for Deshaun McCullough and the young guys in the defense. And then on top of that, I need Deshaun Singleton to play the way he has these first 3 weeks. The staff believes he's a future NFL safety. Go earn it. Go make up for that last Michigan game because you didn't get that opportunity. And I also think as a secondary, I think Buford, Sierra, all these guys, Hartzog, Rex, when he's out there, you guys need to tackle. You guys need to tackle in space. They need to bring Justice Haynes down. If Nebraska regresses in that ability to tackle one-on-one, I think you start to see some issues.
Yeah, I think defensively, Tim, which defense do you – no, I won't ask it like that. These offenses drive the ball from the 25s to the 35s quite a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The EPAs are pretty high, but the finishing drive rate is just okay. Nebraska was much better in the red zone, but again, inside the 10 hasn't yielded as much success as I think they've wanted it to. How much of this game do you think comes down to finishing drive rate, and who is most ready to buck the trend of, man, we moved the ball from here to here. It needs to start generating more sixes as opposed to opportunities for three.
Yeah, I mean, going into it, at least on paper, I think it's Michigan, just because I think once they get closer to that red zone and against what they've seen from Michigan's front, or Nebraska's front so far, I think Michigan is going to want to try and just play power, get a lot of those, heavy personnel in their run at Nebraska. Because, I mean, we can say, I mean, again, Nebraska's playing this differently, but we can say Nebraska against Cincinnati, there were times where Nebraska looked small. I do think they, discipline-wise, is improved defensively, where they are going to be sounder, against the run. We've seen improvement in that. We need to see it. But I think when you get into heavy personnel and some of those packages, I think Michigan's just going to do, again, what they've done in years past where, okay, we're going to out-physical you and we're going to dare you to out-physical us. Nebraska in years past, when they have a Nash and tie in the middle, can do that. They need to show they can do that. So at least on paper going into it, I think Michigan has like a formula to kind of winning in the red zone and kind of finishing drives. Nebraska on paper has like the more versatility. Like that's what I think. Like I think when you get into the red zone and if Nebraska is able to kind of stuff up the run, I think that's where, and if we see that early on, I think that's where I'd be like, okay, well, I think Nebraska now has the advantage in the red zone because I think Nebraska can run and pass and has the dynamic weapons and the ability to kind of spread defenses around where they can find answers in the red zone. I don't think Michigan can if the run game isn't really working, just because I don't really trust a lot of those receivers to win one-on-one matchups.
Does the potential for QB run game inside the red zone, one team has it, the other doesn't. I think data lends me to believe that you have to be able to run the ball from the 15-yard line in. Does the fact that Michigan has an extra component concern you at all inside the red zone?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's where, like, it's the run game. Like, it's the power run. It's what they'll do off of that with Bryce potentially. And yeah, I think that worries me for sure. And but at the same time, I mean, Dylan isn't like the Bryce Underwood threat with his legs, but we've seen him run a good bit. And I think there's, especially against this team, like he's done a good job, I think, of trying to catch defenses on the heels and pulling it and running. There's going to be, I think
he's rushed for 4 first downs this year.
Yeah, I was going to say there's going to be like a sneaky first down pickup, or in the red zone, it's like, oh, he scampered for 15 and got Nebraska down to the 5. Like something like that in this game where there's just a critical pickup with his legs, just because I think he's going to have the defense fooled.
All right, Tim, before we get you out of here, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of the visitors coming on campus this weekend. It's obviously a
big weekend.
Huge recruiting weekend for Nebraska. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on just what ends up happening at 26. A couple commits expected in town. Danny Odom back in town, Claude and Puma. It's big to get those two back in town. Nayland Scott saw Georgia take upset Clemson last week, and he's back in Nebraska this weekend. So opportunity there to kind of get those 3 to shut things down. Still kind of waiting and seeing what Cameron Wilson ends up doing. He told me last week he was planning to visit. Now those plans are, at least up in the air as other programs are trying to get him to not make that visit. So we'll see what happens with him, see if there's any other 26 targets that sneak into town. But in 27, I mean, everything's on the table. You've got, Trey's back in town, peer recruiting. You've got the number 1 player in the country in Kennedy Brown, 5-star offensive tackle, back in town. The last time Nebraska had him in town was in March or early April, late March. And it was for a spring practice. It was just as he was starting to kind of see some national schools. And so Nebraska exceeded expectations. But since that visit, he went to Oregon and Tennessee and Clemson multiple times, Ohio State, Oklahoma. Like, he's been around the country now. And so Nebraska has to make up some ground, and Nebraska has to kind of remind him, what they showed him the first time around, and kind of create some and look to create some like staying power is the goal with him. And then defensively, up front, there's the number 7 defensive lineman, Jamar Thompson, is going to be in town. But the secondary, I think, is where the big opportunity is. You've got the number 4 corner in the country, Juju Johnson, and the number 5 corner in the country, Duve Williams, both out of California, visiting. You have the number 1 safety in the country, Comeray Dorsey, visiting. He's from Hampton, Georgia. Number 7 safety, also out of Georgia, visiting. And so there's an opportunity, I think, for Nebraska to gain some momentum. I think there's some potential opportunity for some movement here in the 2027 class. We'll see if this weekend does enough to get Nebraska over the top. Because there's a few guys I kind of come into the weekend like, hey, one more strong visit at Nebraska could be enough for Nebraska to get over the top. I look at a guy like a Corey Hadley, number 7 safety in the country. UCF was the first to offer when Addison Williams was there. His best relationship is Addison Williams. He's going to take his time with his recruitment. He plays things really close to vest, but I really like where Nebraska stands, and I think it may not be an imminent decision, but I think Nebraska has a chance to kind of emerge as this school to beat in that recruitment coming out of this weekend.
That's our guy, Tim Verghese, Inside Nebraska. Tim, great stuff as always. Enjoy the game this weekend.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you guys. See you tomorrow.